As I wrote in my Shabbat thought, I would like to devote these next two Shabbatot to the study of Passover. I was very intrigued and moved by our discussion a week ago Friday night when I asked in all sincerity who our greatest theologians, philosophers were today. And we all sat a little bit perplexed, and someone said comedians. And by acclaim, everybody agreed. It took us a while to get to the Dalai Lama. True, but no one was excited about it, and quickly we wanted to go back to comedians. And I wrote my Shabbat thought a little bit raw. I'll verbessel it as time goes by, but I wanted to get out this idea why comedians are our greatest philosophers. As Nietzsche says, reflecting upon philosophy, one of the job of philosophers is to get at the truth of the matter. And this was one reason that Nietzsche scoffed at philosophers of his time, because he didn't think that any of them really tried to get to the truth of the matter. He said, if they're protecting philosophy, philosophy is in very big trouble. Now, I would disagree. I think there are some philosophers who actually were great, but there was so much philosophy going around in Germany in the late 1800s that he looked at it, most of it, as not actually getting to the truth of the matter. So when we look at good comedy, the best comedy in my mind, I'm a comedy snob, so I will only limit this to a few comedians who, when they tell jokes, when they set up their stories, they're getting to some internal contradiction in the way we think, in the way that our society operates. People think this way, there's another way to think, and comedians poke fun, poke humor, and you might say they expose the inner tensions and contradictions of our lives and the way that we think. So the more I thought about this, I used to think of comedy as on the liberty side of freedom. Certainly, Passover is about liberty, but it's also about the freedom from the Yetzer Hara to hurt other people, and therefore is poking fun at other people not right because it harms others. I began to think about it more deeply, about how it is that we achieve liberation, and I thought something that I know most of you know, that one of the first things that fascist regimes do is suppress comedy. You can't poke fun at those in authority, which led me to believe that comedy might be a duty. So on one hand, comedy is a liberty, comedy might be a duty. And I don't think comedians think that way. Comedians, musicians, dancers, they do it because they have to. There's some muse that takes a hold of them. But as a society, we want to be, ideally, we want to be exposed. We want those who arrogate to themselves moral superiority to be brought down and to make them be answerable to what other people think, and not just tell people that they can't talk and can't answer. So then the question came up at the end of my Shabbat thought, whether comedy, in the sense of revealing the truth of the matter, is a mitzvah at a Passover Seder. I'm inclining toward yes, except that some people, when you say comedy, they're going to go to the most salacious, prurient level. So there has to be, an arbiter of comedy at every Passover Seder. And of course, my preference is those the wonderful set of jokes that disrupt consciousness and make things in a different way. Which, so you can take a look at the Shabbat thought. It doesn't entirely hang together, and I'll work on it in the future. But at least I think you'll enjoy it. I think it's a good message. Now, which leads us to last night, to talk about Paul Tiller's symbols of faith. And I asked myself again, what is the greatest symbol of Passover? Well, the main symbols discussed are the matzah, the paschal offering, the maror. We have the plagues and so forth. But when you look at the Haggadah, these symbols are presented as answering questions. Why do we have the matzah? Why do we have the Pesach offering? Look at the 4 questions. Why is this night different from other nights? So the presentation of the symbols are all in answer to questions. So it is questions that generate the Passover Seder. Like most people don't notice, I'm just giving you an analogy. The entire Star-Spangled Banner is composed of questions. I'm not sure if that's intentional, that whoever chose that as our national anthem chose a song entirely composed of questions. But the Passover Seder is actually generated by questions. So for me, one might say that the greatest symbol of Passover is the question. And remember, questions take us to unseen regions of our inner lives, unseen regions of the human condition. The problem is, as with God, where we are forbidden to make any likeness or image, there's no ready symbol of the question, of the concept of a question, and therefore the entire Passover Seder, the Haggadah. If I were to say, what's our symbol of questions, I would say it's the Passover Haggadah. What's our symbol of the concept of questions? It's many elements of the Passover Haggadah, but I wanted to communicate that the symbol of the question, which is the Haggadah, points us into the necessity of asking ourselves question. Now, this takes us right to the thought of Paul Tillich, where Tillich, as I've been discussing the past few weeks, he has a completely original concept of the idea of faith. He doesn't mean believing in things for which there is little evidence. Tillich holds that what by he means faith is the integrated personality in all its diverse and disparate elements. The diverse and disparate elements of the inner life have a moment of integration and seek the God beyond God. And one can only find that inner integration through a profound questioning of the self. Secondly, for Tillich to talk about the God beyond God, one has to ask questions of what I'll call one's religious faith. Now remember, one's religious beliefs. Now remember, for Tillich, beliefs are in a lower order. Beliefs come from dogma. Beliefs come from what other people told you you have to believe. Beliefs are not generated by profound, deep, and even mystical experience. Now, deep and mystical experience have to be reduced to beliefs, but beliefs are just placeholders, using Tillich's language, for faith in this very exalted sense. So, when we recite the Passover Haggadah, if we only recite the text, ma tov, that's a good thing that we come together, that we read the Haggadah together, that we have a community dinner based on the idea of freedom. It's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. But in my mind, at the heart of the text are the questions. And as the rabbis teach us, if we don't have original questions, if we don't dig in and find deep, meaningful questions about ourselves, about ideas, I would say love, justice, truth, the beauty, the good, the holy. If we don't have real questions about that, my question would be, have we actually observed the Passover holiday at its spiritual essence? That's my talk last night. So one thing I wanted to mention, it's in the Passover Haggadah, but I know many of you are looking to take the Haggadah to a deeper level, so I want to point to just one part of the Haggadah, say a few words about that, and then bring up some Hasidic teachings, and then leave time for questions. So you may remember in the Haggadah, and by the way, if you're looking for a pretty good Haggadah, I'm recommending the Jewish Publication Society commentary on the Haggadah. It has a good discussion of sources, notes, a wonderful commentary, plus the Hebrew, and then with a good English translation. I wouldn't say buy this for everybody. For everybody, maybe just have the Maxwell House or something simple. But if you're leading a Passover Seder and you want my recommendation on one really good Haggadah, a study Haggadah, I would recommend Jewish Publication Society, Haggadah, Historical Introduction, Translation, and Commentary. In any case, I'm on the very familiar part of the Haggadah that ends with the phrase, I'll introduce it with the phrase, therefore, even if we were all wise, all understanding, we are all elders, all know the Torah, we are obligated to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt, and everyone who lengthens the discussion is praiseworthy. By the way, which is why on Second Night Seder that we're going to be doing on Zoom, 6 to 7, I'll be giving a talk on the Hasidic idea of the exile of the word. 7 to 8, our own abbreviated Seder with a lot of music. We'll take a break. And then just as the Haggadah suggests to us, we'll come back and do a lengthy presentation on what anybody has learned at their Seder. So, Kol HaMarbeh L'Saper B'Tzatrotayim, Harei Ze Meshubach. So we will do the Meshubach thing, the blessed thing, and continue the discussion until the last person standing. Then it goes on to the section that says, as an example of this, one time Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Joshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were participating in a festive meal in Bnei Brak and were discussing the Exodus throughout the night until their students came and said to them, "Our masters, it's time to recite the morning Shema." So they went all the way till dawn. And then we are given an example of what kinds of things they studied that night. And we're quoting now Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. At other times, I've told the story of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It's a wonderful thing to do. So one thing you can do if you want at your Passover Seder, when you come to this part where it mentions Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Joshua, Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, each of them has a magnificent story. And some of their stories are they're interacting with each other. And you can look them up and you can spend your entire Seder just talking about these famous rabbis. Anyway, here's what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, "I'm about 70 years old, and I'd never convinced anyone that the Exodus should be recited, should be mentioned every evening," meaning it says in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verse 3, you should mention the Exodus from Egypt, Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of your life. I want to show you where we mention the Exodus from Egypt in the daily davening, the daily morning service. But the question is, should we mention it in the night as well? Until Ben Zoma expounded this way: so that you may remember the day of your departure from the land of Egypt, all the days of your life. The days of your life is daytime. All the days of your life includes the night times. Remember, the day you might think from sunrise to sunset, but in the book of Genesis, a day is an entire 24-hour cycle. So Ben Zoma says it could have just said the days of your life, since it said Kol Yemei Chayecha in the morning and in the evening. But the sages say, this would be the other sages there that night, all the days of your life, including the world to come. So even when we get to the world to come, there's one mitzvah that's continued, that we know of that's continued the world to come, which is Purim, by the way, will be celebrated in the next world. And we should also discuss the Exodus from Egypt in Olam Haba, in the next world. And that's a very deep question, because you might say Exodus from Egypt is something historical that stands for something in history. What is the metaphysical dimension? I hope to get to that today. So many of you actually probably don't know exactly where we mention the Exodus from Egypt in the evening and in the morning. So what I want to do is go to the daily prayer book and share with you what the rabbis wrote responding to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 16 verse 3 to mention the Exodus from Egypt. And here's what you're gonna see as I read this. You're going to see there's a general introduction about God, and then it's as if the text homes its way down into the Exodus from Egypt. So from the general down to the particular. So this is from the morning prayer service. I'll just read a section of it. You can go look this up. It's called the mentioning of the Exodus from Egypt in the morning prayer service. It says, "True and certain, established and enduring, fair and faithful, beloved and cherished, delightful and pleasant, awesome and powerful, correct and accepted, true and beautiful, is this affirmation to us forever and ever. Emet v'yatziv v'nachon v'kayam v'yashar v'ne'eman v'ahu v'chaviv v'nechmad v'na'im v'nora v'adir u'mittukan u'mikubal v'tov v'yafeh ha'davar hazeh aleinu le'olam v'ed." It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful rhythmic meditation. True, the God of the universe is our sovereign. The rock of Jacob is the shield of our salvation. From generation to generation, God endures, and God's name endures, and God's throne is well established. God's sovereignty and faithfulness endure forever. God's words are living and enduring, faithful and delightful forever, to all eternity. For our ancestors, for us, our children, and our children's generations, and all the generations of your servant Israel's offspring. It goes on in this great identifying the nature of God to the people of Israel. And then it goes further and says, you are the first, you are the last, and other than you we have no sovereign, redeemer, or savior. And then right down to the mentioning of the exodus from Egypt. From Egypt you redeemed us, Adonai our God, and from the house of slavery you liberated us. All their firstborn you slew, but your firstborn you redeemed. The sea of reeds you split, the wanton sinners were drowned. The dear ones were brought across, and the water covered their foes, not one of them was left. It's a very warlike imagery here. For this the beloved praised and exalted God. The dear ones offered hymns, songs, praises, and blessings, and thanksgiving to the sovereign, the living and enduring God, exalted and uplifted, great and awesome, who humbles the haughty and lifts the lowly, redeems the captive, liberates the humble, and helps the poor, who responds to his people in their outcry to him. And it goes on further from that. So when you read the mentioning of the exodus from Egypt in the morning service, it's actually a quite beautiful meditation on the nature of God, and then drills right down to the exodus from Egypt, ending with the phrase, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha ner dabakodesh, the thing we're all familiar with, the mi chamocha, that's taken from Exodus chapter 13. Now that we know from this passage in the Haggadah that we mentioned that the days of our life, and including the evenings, there's actually a different, much shorter recitation in the evening prayer, and I'll mention a little bit of this. Now, why am I doing this? Because many people go right past that discussion between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Ben Zoma, who say you should mention Egypt in the morning and in the evening. Well, where is that? I'm going to venture to guess that most of the guests at your Seder have no idea where that actually is when we mention the Exodus in the morning and in the evening. Well, it's right in the daily prayer book. So I'll bring my recommended daily prayer book and the page numbers next time. But you'll have to get a daily prayer book and look this up. And it might be, well, in my house, it'll be fascinating. It might be fascinating for your people to know exactly where it is mentioned, and the actual words where the exit from Egypt is far more than just the Exodus. It's really a statement about the nature of the divine. So I'll recite a little bit from the evening here. True and faithful is all of this, and firmly established for us that Adonai is our God, there is none but God, and we are Israel, God's nation. God redeems us from the power of kings, our sovereign who delivers us from the hand of all cruel tyrants. God is the God who exacts vengeance for us from our foes, and who brings just retribution to the enemies of our soul, who performs great deeds that are beyond comprehension, and wonders beyond number, who sets our soul in life and does not allow our foot to falter, who led us upon the heights of our enemies and raised our pride above all who hate us, who wrought first miracles and vengeance upon Pharaoh, signs and wonders on the land of the offsprings of Ham, and who struck with his anger the firstborn of Egypt and removed his children of Israel from their midst to eternal freedom, who brought his children through the split parts of the sea of reeds, while those who pursued them and hated them, God caused to sink into the depths. When his children perceived God's power, they lauded and gave grateful praises to God's name. God's sovereignty they accepted upon themselves willingly. Moses and the children of Israel raised their voices to you, God, in song with abundant gladness, and said unanimously, Mi chamocha, who is like to you, God. So when you look at this this mentioning of the Yam Suf, you get a wonderful introduction to an aspect of Jewish theology. In fact, for those of you who want to really expand on this at a Passover Seder, you might mention that the three core parts of traditional Jewish theology, and this comes right out of the prayer book, see God as the creator, the Revealer, and the Redeemer. This is something worth memorizing. If someone says, what is the idea of God in the Jewish tradition? 3 elements: the Creator, the Revealer, the Redeemer. If you look in the first part of the Shema and its blessings, how do we understand God as Creator? Yotzer Or, the God who shapes light. Now, this is a quote from Isaiah, but it's a fascinating image because it does include Boreh Or, which means create light out of nothing, but also says Yotzer Or, which is to shape light. Now, we think of light being completely ethereal, non-material. From the divine perspective, you might say it is shaped by the divine mind. It's a fascinating image. So God is the Yotzer Or. What is the next understanding of God in the traditional prayer book? Is the Revealer. Abigail chanted that this morning in the Ahava Rabbah prayer, that God reveals Torah in love. Now, again, if you want to take this deeply, when it says that God reveals Torah, it doesn't really mean the 10 Commandments, the revelation of Torah at Mount Sinai. It doesn't exclude that. But if you look at it deeply, it's not really what it's talking about. Because if you look at the prayer, Ahava Rabbah, with great love, it says that God teaches us Chukei Chaim, the laws of life. Now, some people say a chok is a statute we don't understand. But there's many, many places that talk us about understanding chukim. So we have to first accept upon us the laws of life and not try to figure them out once they are delivered to us. I would say this is for children and adolescents, that the parents say to the children, look, here are the laws of life. This is going to get you through life. This is going to get you through your adolescence. You're free to question. You're free to come to us with our questions. We've thought this through a little bit. We found the reasons for the answers. But you're going to find if you follow these laws of life, it will go better. I want to give you one example that came up continuously during the time of the Hebrew school, and that was the law of life to be as fair and square and honest with other people as much as possible. So one thing in the lives of children, adolescents, and adults is we hide from other people because they don't want them to judge us. Because we don't want to be caught. We don't want to be outed. So oftentimes when we have trouble with people and people say, well, I don't know if I should tell my friend this. I don't know if I should tell my friend that. And the best answer is just be as honest as you possibly can without making yourself too vulnerable. Tell someone the truth as much as you can. Stop talking and let them respond. I just remember a very critical moment in one of our daughters' lives when a friend told one of our daughters that he was contemplating suicide. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell my parents. Okay? Swear to me you won't tell anybody. Our daughter came to us with a sincere moral dilemma. I have a friend contemplating suicide who made me swear not to tell anybody, which included Meirab and me, and not tell his mother. And we sat about and thought, what's our moral duty? Is the fact that she swore to him above the moral duty to perhaps intervene and save his life? We had a deep family discussion on the nature of promises, promises elicited, you might say, under pressure, the substance of those promises, the nature of those promises versus higher level moral duties. It's one of the deep discussions I remember our family having, and we didn't say to our daughter, well, we're going to ignore that. We're going to the mother. We talked about it enough until our daughter said, okay, so you guys got to talk to his mother. And we said, no, actually, you have to. You have to. And that was a big thing. Our daughter was about 15 at the time, but that was a bat mitzvah moment. And she said to us, he's going to break off his friendship with me. He'll probably never talk to me again. And we said, that's the price you pay for possibly saving someone's life. Now, it might have just been drama. It might have been the desire to call attention to oneself. But this isn't the kind of secret you do not bear when someone else's life might be at stake. If he just likes the drama, then he will have learned his lesson. Don't say that kind of stuff to people unless you mean it. And if you say it, someone's going to arrive to help you. So our daughter called the mother, told the mother. The mother was very distraught. As far as we know, she investigated and came to the realization it might have just been drama. If it were something more than that, the family was forewarned. And of course, he broke his relationship off with our daughter. Now, this is a long time ago, so I don't know if the ensuing years they've become friends again. I could actually ask them. But I want to give the sense to you that children and adolescents sometimes are burdened down with secrets because another person makes them swear. But the child, the adolescent, has to have enough da'at. Has to have enough, but this is from the Haggadah. The child has to have enough da'at to question. Am I obligated by that? Is there a higher level that I have to seek out? Now, this is part of the laws of life. You can't find a list of the laws of life that's going to pertain exactly to you in every life situation. Even then, we have to adjudicate how much does this law of life apply to me right now? And I guarantee you, for every law of life, there is an opposite, a contradictory law of life. There's no answer book. So even though in the prayer Ahava Rabbah it says God gives us the laws of life, God leaves it to conscience, to the conscience, the moral faculty, and to spiritual consciousness to figure out these laws of life. Now, ideally, where ought this happen? Where do children learn the laws of life and how to discuss the laws of life? Probably in the home. And this is where parents have to be super patient and deep themselves and not just order kids around, because at a certain point, those orders won't make any difference. They're just going to hit the child and flow right off. The deepest thing to do is to look at the Ahava Rabbah prayer, for example. Understand that the laws of life are a gift from God to all human beings. Our gift, you might say, is our tradition, the Torah, the Psalms, Proverbs, our entire Torah tradition. But why is this tradition here? Not for obedience. The only reason we obey the ritual dimension is the container for the spiritual dimension, like Passover. Passover has a lot of ritual containers, but those ritual containers are only justified if we observe the spiritual dimension. For example, in the second of the three ways that we understand God, creator, revealer. I'm focusing on the revealer of the laws of life that are delivered over into the unconscious. You might say delivered over to the soul, but need elucidation in study, ideally with the family, then with each other, maybe a study leader. But this is one of the best ways we can spend our time. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen in the school. We're going to have to find our own ways to teach and discuss the laws of life as adults. And of course, for us, that's Torah study. And you'll notice that whenever I do Torah study, I try to say a therefore. Now that we've learned all this beauty and textual interconnections and the amazing literature of Torah, there has to be, in my mind, there has to be a therefore. A therefore. We call this the exhortation when you study homiletics and learn to be a clergy person. There has to be the charge. Now, what ought each of us do? In fact, I don't think a talk of mine is complete until I apply it to some aspect of our lived lives, what I call the therefore, the exhortation to do or not do something that everybody understands. What's my exhortation here? Think about the laws of life that apply to you the most deeply, sometimes the hardest ones, that bring tension and conflict of duties in your life. Discuss this with other people. Encourage your children to discuss this, so the laws of life are not something static, the 613 commandments of the Torah, but something alive in your life, your family's life, the life of your children, all the way to your adult children. I and we discuss the laws of life with our adult children, I would say, on a continuous basis. That's part of what forms our relationship with our children is discussing the laws of life. So God is creator, God is revealer, especially the laws of life. By the way, I think this would be a wonderful discussion at a Passover Seder. And third, God as redeemer. Now, you'll notice from the passages that I just read that the idea of God as redeemer is an archetypal understanding of the divine, which is expressed in our narrative in the Bible. And as I discussed last night, I don't think we're called upon to believe this literally, meaning that it's actual history. It's literature, so it's what Paul Tillich would call a broken myth, meaning we're doubting the historicity of what the text says. We're demythologizing the text. And then when we demythologize the text, we have to go into the deeper symbolic nature of the text and ask us what deeper truth is being communicated. So if I say, I don't literally believe in the 10 plagues, I don't literally believe in the splitting of the Sea of Reeds. Actually, I do believe it, but we'll put that aside. I don't literally believe in the parting of the Sea of Reeds. I don't believe this story literally. Okay, so you've demythologized the text. You're doubting the historicity of the text. That's fine. But what are you going to do with the symbol? And one of the deep symbols is God hates tyranny. God wants tyrants to be brought low. And in the ideal situation, unfortunately, history does not enough deliver on this ideal. There are terrible tragedies where people are devastated, ruined, murdered by tyrants. But the ideal in the Bible is that the divine is a source of redemption for the people who ideally can find their way out of the clutches of the tyrant. Sometimes the redemption is miraculous, but not simply go from the hands of the tyrant into a kind of a moral unknown, but we go from Egypt to Mount Sinai. Now, so the idea, the archetypal idea when you study the Exodus story, let's say from Exodus chapter 1 to Exodus chapter 16, there's a lot of beautiful stuff there. And I said I might do a session on all of this coming Wednesday night. I'll let you know. But it's wonderful material to study. But I believe we have to demythologize it, not ask ourselves, is it historically true or not? I think most of it is not. Most of it is ancient traditions that became literature. But what do each elements of this myth, as it were, myth meaning here now, a narrative that creates symbols in the sense of Paul Tillich, which means, so I love what Shanti said last night, quoting Thomas Merton, signs communicate, symbols bring us into communion with our souls, communion with God, and communion with others. So if we're going to reject the literal dimension of the text, we're still called upon to go into the symbolic dimension. And by the way, that's one thing that happens at many Passover Seders. Many people say, well, I don't believe in this. Okay, that's a fair statement. They're staying there, they're demythologizing. I think an appropriate response would be, well, what do you believe? What do you believe in? Now, some people, I'll say the adamant secular atheist would say, well, I don't believe in anything non-empirical. Now, that's a statement which actually, by the way, falls apart upon examination. Because when someone says, all that exists empirically, how does one test that statement empirically? Meaning, how can you go into a laboratory and prove that only that which can be observed empirically, proven mathematically, or by some kind of natural science, how do we know that's all that exists? That's a statement beyond the purview of science and the natural sciences. So even that statement is an incoherent statement from a natural science perspective, because you can't prove or disprove that statement with natural science. And a person might come to your Seder and says, I don't believe anything but empiricism, natural science. One could say, well, how do you know that to be true? It's a fair question. And what scientific experiment or mathematical formula or aspect of physics could prove that to be true? Hopefully the person will think a little bit and say, probably can't. Say, okay, so we're set with the fact that we believe there's a natural world that can be experienced empirically and by natural sciences, mathematics, etc. That does not mean that a non-empirical metaphysical world might be true. For example, the metaphysical value of justice, which is at the core of the archetypal understanding of Passover. It's a God committed, again, this is the myth and the demythologizing. The story works, the story has coherence because God hates tyrants. The story has coherence because slavery is wrong, not as a consensus, not as just one belief among many, but it's actually, as it says here, emet ve'emunah. It is a true and certain belief in the metaphysical understanding of justice, because if it's not metaphysically true, it's just human consensus, then what are we getting so upset about? If it's just one opinion among other opinions, vanilla is better than chocolate, freedom is better than slavery, it's just not one opinion among other opinions. It's actually a thought that accords with a deeper reality. That's a worthwhile discussion to have. What is the difference between an opinion and, I'll say, a deep thought that connects us with a metaphysical reality? Now, every one of you know the difference between chocolate is better than vanilla and freedom is better than slavery. I'm just going to assume everybody knows the difference between those two statements. One actually is an opinion, and one is a thought that connects us to a metaphysical reality. I mean, in the Tillich sense, that it's a thought that takes us to the God, the God beyond conventions, beyond stale ideas, and into something that's true about the divine, and you might say true about the human condition. So I wanted to give you an example today of the deeper way that you can study something in the Seder. I began with the discussion of the rabbis who talked all night. The Haggadah then takes us down to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Ben Zoma. They discussed that the Exodus from Egypt has to be discussed in the morning and at night. I went and found the source in the prayer book. Amazing sources, different from each other, the morning source, the evening source. I studied them carefully. And then I asked, well, where does this happen in the prayer book? Well, it's at the end of the Shema and its escort of blessings. Well, what is that in its entirety? It's the Jewish statement about the nature of the divine. Creator, revealer, redeemer. That God's word is the source of the universe. I think that's not hard for most spiritual people to accept. Revealer, God reveals the laws of life. Well, what are they? And is it our duty to learn them and discuss them? Emphatically, yes. And how does this relate to the third nature of the divine, the Redeemer? And what metaphysical teaching does that impart beyond the myth? So this is just a small example of what it means to take a little part of the Haggadah, go down the wormhole. When you get to that part, the leader, enough people agree, say, can I take you on a little bit of a journey? Now, you'd have a patient group of people who are willing to go on for a few minutes. And I'm just giving you a tiny example. When I look at I have a Sfat Emet commentary on the Haggadah, and one sentence after another, he just plumbs the depths, and then goes into another sentence and plumbs the depths. So in the hands of a great spiritual teacher like the Sfat Emet, the Haggadah is a series of doorways into the depths of human consciousness and the depths of human experience.